Okay, we'll get this meeting started. Call this meeting to order. Do I have to ask for disclosures again?
Probably wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. I'll ask again if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest with anything under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So we got yours, Councilor McElwain, right? Anything else? No? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the rest of the reports and the agenda that we have, and then prior to the 8.4 draft budget, where we will put the draft budget on the floor and have a round the table discussion. Before that, we'll provide an opportunity to talk to the delegations that came to see us on whatever day, Tuesday. Wow. Okay, but I want us to make sure that we go through the rest of the reports first. So the report that we're on right now is the Community Impact Grants recommendation.
Councillor McElwain has declared.
Just on the agenda.
We haven't finished discussions on
The capital budget?
We'll do that at the end.
Well, no, we probably should finish that up right now let's finish capital, yeah. Okay, so let's go back and do any areas that councillors wanted to talk to you about the capital budget then. Councillor McElwain?
Thank you. The big one for me in the capital budget is the same as it was in our previous discussions, and that's the $500,000 set aside for a new facility. We were supposed to be getting a report on the needs requirement before our budget discussions, and that hasn't happened yet. So to my knowledge, we don't have any identified need, number one. But number two, the report from KPMG for county and just recommended that we should be talking about amalgamating or potentially sharing utility or facilities. And why would we be planning a $6 million loan to be building a new facility when maybe that's not the best solution overall? I think that we need to be talking about potentially finding ways to share instead of putting, number one, taking $500,000 this year or 2020 and then a $6 million loan. It's too early to even think about that right now. And as I say, we still don't have a report saying that we have a needs requirement.
Annie?
So with regards to the needs, I don't think we need a report stating that we have a need. We've walked through our facilities with the council, and there's a deep need for the safety and health of our staff, even within our existing buildings. The question is how much larger does the facility need to be to meet our future needs? And so that's part of what the study is looking at. We will be bringing a report in the new year with regards to that. No different than a number of other items in here. We do allocate funding to be able to do and proceed with some of that work in the next year. So our intent is we were hoping to get it to council before the budget. Just due to other workloads, we weren't. We will be having the consultant coming in and having that report. But not only is it about the future need, but it's also our current need in replacing facilities that are falling apart and making very unsafe healthy and safety issues for our staff. So we do need to proceed with that in the near future. It's also within the council strategic plan that we're going to be proceeding with opening a facility within this term of council. So we will bring forward a report. It will look at that. We have had discussions with the county with regards to shared facilities. In some municipalities, the KPMG report says that generally there will be some municipalities that there will not be able to be shared just due to locational basis of where the county is having their facilities and where ours are, and locations to service those. So some municipalities will be able to have that advantage of shared facilities. We brought forward last year as part of the budget, sharing our mechanical service with the county. So we continue to look at those opportunities with the county and sharing those opportunities. But at this stage, we are working on that report. We'll be presenting that early in the new year. And our hope is to be able to get direction to council to then start moving into a design and tendering phase in 2020. Without that money, then we would then not be able to do that until 2021, which would then further delay the building and opening of the facility for another couple of years, which at this stage with our facilities, we don't believe that's a reasonable piece to have unsafe buildings that our staff are currently operating in.
I think I just want to add a little bit to that. We use consultants a lot. I don't think this is a need to have a consultant. I mean, a walk around that we did with infrastructure services. If anybody that sees our facilities and sees the age of our facilities and what we're doing to use duct tape to keep them together right now, it's pretty clear that we need more facilities. And I don't think we need any kind of further discussion and spending taxpayers' dollars to have a consultant identify that. We do have to identify what that looks like, and that's where that assessment will come in. As far as the county goes, they have no plans they just built the central operations garage just outside of Center Wellington, and they have no plans to do anything as far as an operational center in Center Wellington. What came out of the KPMG report was mostly thinking about the operations garages that they foresee doing in North Wellington. And not in Center Wellington. So if we waited for anything with the county, we'd be waiting an awful long time. Councillor McLean?
Thank you. I guess in previous meetings, I've asked this same question a couple times and really never got an answer, but the needs requirement contract that we currently have was going to come back to us, I understood, to say, are there alternatives? Now, we have 4 buildings equally split across the municipality, and yes, they are in need of repair, no question about it. They're in need of ladies' washrooms in some cases, or maybe all cases, no doubt about it. And each one of them can be upgraded. There's room to do space or to do work on those individual buildings that would cost a lot less than $6 million, a lot less than. A lot of it could be done next year with the $500,000. I don't think we're looking at alternatives, and I don't think we're looking at the most effective way to provide the services needed for our community. We're spending, and I just cannot agree with taking another $6 million debt on the community for something that we don't even know we need yet, and that's what we're kind of approving if we go with the $500,000 next year. So I still just do not agree with that concept at all until we get a real look at it.
Andy?
One of the major bases, there's 2, one for the health and safety, but the second component, which we have spoken to council with and spoken to council while we were on the tour, is really about the efficiency of the operations. We can continue and throw money into the existing buildings and not be effective, efficient, running around with vehicles that are having to go long distances, not sharing resources, not sharing vehicles across the operations. This is all about exactly what we were looking at in the KPMG study, is what are efficiencies we can be looking at by sharing resources, not just with other municipalities, but sharing resources internally, where we would have all of our operations located in one major building with satellite servicing the Fergus and Elora areas. So, and also looking at selling of some of those properties to help offset some of those costs. So, you know, our current operation from a staff perspective is not efficient. That is why we're looking at from a health and safety and an efficiency piece to bring the operations into a more efficient use as we move forward to serve the larger population of Center Wellington as we grow, not just today's population.
Councillor Kitchers?
There's several things here that I feel that in the past meetings we had discussions that we weren't, that centralizing an operations was not as efficient. That was clearly said, that having them several locations was more efficient for our municipality. So I'd just like to correct that. That was said at a meeting. Second of all,
Sorry, can we deal with one at a time? Firstly, I don't know how much more clear we can be on this point. We're not talking about centralized operating garage. We're talking about an operation garage with satellite offices in different locations across Center Wellington. We're looking into the feasibility of what makes sense from an operational perspective. So we've never, a centralized operating garage is something that was done away with 3 years ago. So we haven't been talking about that for 3 years. We're talking about what makes sense for Center Wellington, and it's not that. So let's just cover off that first question. We're not talking about a centralized operations garage. Second point?
building a large facility that's going to have $6 million in debt, the feasibility study is to study the options of that, and that's exactly what we were waiting for. And that's rational decision-making. Wish list decision-making is saying that we want that, and we will do it without even the information to make the decision about where we're going to allocate and how we're going to allocate it, or if we actually need that facility. And that's where you get the information to make the appropriate decision-making on whether we should be fixing or expanding different of the locations and how we're going to do that. And that's what we were waiting for. And as Councillor McElwain has said, that was a discussion that we had, and we were waiting for it. And it doesn't make sense to go ahead and almost pre-decide that this is exactly what we're going to do. We are in the position where we have to decide where the monies are allocated and what is the best decisions, and it's best when you get the reports for that decision-making. And that's what I think that we need to wait for that. I agree with Councillor McElwain that that is what this budget process is about, and we were told that we would get that. Now we're told, so we just have to wait for that. In fact, there are some things about this budget, perhaps we should wait for that and this whole budget process, because there have some grave concerns about what the numbers here that we're doing here. So I'm just sort of.
So Colin, at this time, can you come up and again, talk about the process that we've already gone through, and how we went through this process of this operations center, kind of, what's happened on it. We put it in our strategic plan that we're going to get it done, so that decision's been made, but just from your perspective, just refresh us on what we're doing with this.
For sure. Thanks, Mayor Linton. So the process is our intention is to report back to council on January 27th with the results of the space needs assessment and present a conceptual design for a future facility, the facility itself, and also the yard space requirements for growth. So we've formed a working group with staff, and the consultant has kind of steered the conversation in terms of what the requirements are. This isn't just infrastructure services building. This is crossing several departments, clerks for record storage, parks for office space, and also equipment storage, and maintenance areas, workbench areas. We've gone into the details in terms of square footage for office space, for record storage, for equipment. And so our next step of the process is to touch base with staff. With the final results of the space needs assessment, we've got our working group. I think it's next week we're meeting, the 12th, I believe, and have that touch point with staff, and then come back to council at the next opportunity, which is January 27th, after the Roma conference, and present that information. So we were actually, just before I came here, talking about that workshop with staff next week. So that's the process. At that point, we'd be looking for direction from council on the next steps. And You know, the risk if we don't have budget, if that gets deferred until 21 or 22 or later, that puts us in a holding pattern for the rest of the year because we won't be able to proceed any further. So that's the risk of deferring that.
Councillor Van Lien?
Thanks, Mayor. I guess that kind of answers all my questions. Basically, we know in 2020 we're going to be doing something, or 2021. We're starting to, if you want to say, stash it away in a glass jar until that point, from what I understand, until council makes a decision what that actually looks like. We do this budgeting in business all the time with companies and corporations. It would be very silly not to start setting some funds away until we actually come up with a design. I guess this is where I'm struggling. I'm not quite sure where this feeling comes from, unless I'm missing something, but if we put 500,000 in our budget, is there a fear that we're going to start building without council ever seeing it? Because that's really what it sounds like, is here's 500,000, they're going to build it and council doesn't know what's going on. We're setting some 500,000 aside, from my understanding, so that we can make those decisions in 2020, 2021 as we go forward. Otherwise, we have no funds set aside, and I think that would be poor planning. So I think we should leave it in there, subject to everything comes back to council before we build. That is the subject to, and as long as that's happening, I'm good with this.
Councillor Foster?
We've never fully considered renovation at this table, renovation of the Fergus garage. We have 4 garages already. They're dispersed across the municipality. My view is we could renovate this garage, and we haven't even considered it. So point number 1 is there's a flaw in our process. We're building a case for a predetermined outcome, and that to me is wrong. Number 2, we're going to saddle the municipality with $6 million of debt if we proceed. We already have 4 garages. My view is we need to work with the 4 garages we have. Each morning, snowplow operators show up at this garage, they get in their trucks, and they leave daily. In the summertime, they do the same with potholes or road maintenance activities. Nobody works here 8, 9, 10 hours a day. I cannot see why we need to borrow $6 million to build a 4th garage. I totally disagree with that.
So I don't want to get into this too much because Colin explained this already. This is not a garage. This is an operations facility, and Colin went through the different kinds of functions that would be housed out of it. So I just want to be clear that we're talking about the same thing here. Strategic direction 1, under we will continue to support the principle that residential growth pays for the cost of increased costs of providing services and infrastructure of new residents. The 4th initiative is open a new operations facility. So this has been approved by this council, and that gives staff the direction to do what they've done to date. Councillor Kitchis?
When we did the strategic plan process, I'd always mentioned that you need to have some fiscal numbers attached to it. To approve a strategic plan without any fiscal reasoning that's how you get into this dilemma of wish list, strategic plan, and then going back to the strategic plan and saying, well, you said that we were going to do it, but we did. The whole process is that we go to the financial and then we discern whether we can do it and whether it's appropriate. And that's how the process works. But when you divided those processes and now you're going back to the strategic plan and saying, oh, we have to do it, we have to do it, that's erroneous thinking of strategic planning, because you've separated the financial aspect of it in the decision making. And now you're going to, we're deciding about the fiscal part of it, and we have some questions about it. And you're saying we can't question it because it's in the strategic plan. Like that's the flawed process here. And so it's not, Councillor Foster has an accurate and legitimate concern that we haven't looked at these other options. And that's information that we would hopefully get in this coming report. But if the RFP says, tell us that we need a new building, well, that's also flawed too. Because the RFP is supposed to be looking at what the options are, and that's what we want, that's the information we want. And so like saying that the strategic plan says that we have to do it that's flawed. That's all. That's normally how, when we were at the strategic plan process, you said, well, we'll go to the budgeting process and we'll see how these all work. Well, you're saying that we have to do it now. And that's what we were waiting for, the information, the financial and the reporting, so that we can discern what we should be doing.
Councilor Dunsmore?
I guess my question is for Colin, because you're more involved in the report and the building of the report. We have properties that are out there, and Bob's talked about those that we could fix up or whatever. Are we looking at what to do with those properties as part of this process? So is there an opportunity for, if we're building a corporate center, a more modern one that serves our purposes better, is it going to make some of those buildings redundant so we can then dispose of those buildings and use some of those funds towards this? So that's my first question. I'll have a follow-up.
Through Mayor Linton, yeah, that's correct. That's absolutely correct. So there may be an opportunity to sell current properties that we own, and the revenue from the sales of those properties would go against the future project. Correct.
Councilor Dunsmore?
So having said that, we can dispose of those properties and that'll add to the pot of money we have or reduce what we need. If the study does determine that there are some of those facilities that we should be utilizing and repairing, and let's just say they come up and they say we don't need a new corporate center, let's fix up these two buildings, then we can allocate that $500 to repairing those two buildings. We're not locked into actually building a new corporate center if the report comes back and says it's more feasible to do this and this, in which case I have to agree with Stephen and say that we need to put this money aside so that we can do one or the other.
Yeah, that's correct. So that'll be the next decision point for council, is to evaluate and consider the options presented, and then make a decision in terms of the direction forward from there. So that's the intent of the January 27th meeting.
Councilor McElwain?
Thanks, Scully. Since our last budget meeting, I have seen the actual, I have the executive summary here for the RFP that went out for this study that's being done. And it says it's a concept design and project cost estimate for a new combined township operations center. It doesn't give the option of looking at using existing facilities. It doesn't talk about upgrading existing facilities, except the business case shall include a cost estimate for an addition to the Elora Works garage to be determined by the consultant. That's the only mention of using existing facilities in any way. So the document, or the report coming back in January, obviously is not going to give us that option as something that we can look at, and that's why it's why I keep asking the question, and it's why I keep disagreeing with $500,000 going into a design project when we haven't looked at the most effective way to spend the taxpayers' money.
Would you want to answer that? Is there any question there? I mean, you know, how many years of our experienced staff time has identified this need for a new place to work out of and a new place to provide services for residents of Central Wellington? I'm not sure that was the nature of our discussion when we did the strategic planning process, to identify this as something that we want to do this term of council.
Yeah. We are evaluating options as part of the process. You know, the terms of reference had to provide some direction for, you know, the bidders to provide some sort of, you know, informed scope of work and costing for the RFP process. So we are looking at options, and like I said, those options will be presented to council for consideration, And where we go after that meeting will be up to council. They'll direct the next steps. But we'll obviously come forward as staff and the consultant with a recommendation. But then it's up to council to determine, where we go from here. So that's the process.
Andy?
I also just want to close with the comment of saying, the key to this is also looking at efficiencies. At the end of the day, our operations are not efficient. We're spread out all over the place. We've had funding for identifying some parks building repairs, some Queen Street building repairs, some Pilkington Street repairs. They've all been Band-Aid solutions to get us to a stage where we've been focused on looking at how do we become more efficient in our operations, sharing equipment, sharing staff resources across the board, instead of having it scattered throughout the organization, across the community, and not serving our community for those operational needs.
Councillor Van Loon?
Thank you. I don't want to belay this point, but I think that there's something we've spoken about in the past, which is, and it's been brought up multiple times, why do we hire consultants? Don't we have professionals on staff? When we hire a consultant, we go back to that same kind of feeling. Why aren't we not using our staff to do this instead of hiring consultants? This is a portion where I see that we've gone out for design or at least an RFP to say, okay, what's the best use? But there's also pieces where our staff say, there's no point having a garage, and they may or may not say, I'm going to use the West Gary garage. There's no point having one way out there with a salt shed when all the trucks have to go out there to get salt and they're parked over here. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to assume staff know because they've driven it back and forth and back and forth. So a portion of this, we have to trust our staff, or we go to a consultant and their staff's going to go, why wouldn't they just listen to us? We do it every day. The other aspect, so we have to take that concept and say staff has a certain amount, and then when it comes to design, they're going to maybe pass it on for an RFP and say, okay, what's this going to look like at a consultant level? The very same thing that any one of us business owners would do with our staff and say, tell us what's happening. I don't want to hire a consultant, and that's been said around this table over and over. I do not want to hire a consultant just for the basic aspects of it. What's the purpose of how this works? Let's put that $500,000 away, and then let's make that decision when we get a little more information, but let's put that in the jar. Otherwise, we're backwards. Thanks.
Councillor Foster?
It's 25 kilometers from Inverhaw to Bellwood. It's 6 miles from the top of the center Wellington to the river and 6 miles more to the bottom. We have hundreds of kilometers of roadway. And our municipality is dispersed across 25 kilometers. Therefore, the 4 garages we have need to be dispersed across the municipality. We have a grid of side roads to plow. We have 2 large urban areas to plow. It makes perfect sense to have 4 garages. We already have 4 garages. You can call it what you want, Your Worship. We're talking about borrowing $6 million to build a garage, in my view, that is not required. And I cannot see any reasonable reason to do this. We need to work with the equipment we have, the buildings we have. The geography of our community is such that 4 garages dispersed across make perfect sense.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. When we first started discussing this operations center, my understanding was this is not a garage. It's not just a garage. And all I keep hearing in this discussion is we're talking about garage. In fact, this is an operations center because of the fact we're growing to 52,000 people. We're going to need more staff. And I'm looking at this building. I don't see a lot of room to add additional staff in this building. So we're going to have to find other places to relocate the additional staff. When I went on the tour and saw the various facilities where wastewater people are working, where the garage, the people who operate our snowplows, some of them are like cheek to jowl in very small places, which quite frankly look like third world. The fact of the matter, this operations center is looking not just at maybe adding some garage bays, it's looking at where are we going to park all the additional staff that we're going to bring on to manage a community of 52,000 people. Now, I've heard, for example, we're talking about we're going to locate clerks there and record storage. I heard at one point I think there might be even some computer servers going in there, maybe IT was going in. Maybe what we need to hear is what is a full list of all the different service branches that we're thinking of going into this operations center. So I've also heard that we're not planning to shut down all of our various remote garages that we have out at different parts of the township. We've heard that, in fact, we probably will have to keep some of those there in order to be able to more effectively service locally instead of having the trucks drive from one central point out. But I think the key thing is its operations center, which is talking about various services that we offer here. In terms of this 500,000, I think from a budgeting perspective, all we're doing is we're putting 500,000 aside to say, yeah, we're interested in seeing where does this take us. We're going to hear the report in January. We've set aside 500,000, and if we hear, yes, we need to proceed, we've got the money to keep going. If we don't put that aside and suddenly we hear that, yes, we do need to proceed, we're stuck. We have to now wait a full other year. So I agree. I think we need to set that 500,000, leave it in the budget, as if we need to proceed, it's there. In the meantime, let's wait until we get the report and find out who all is moving into this operations center, but it's a lot more than just a garage.
Its primary purpose is
Councillor
public works.
Kittrus? Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor McCray, you're right. And that's why we should get the information about what that is about. That's exactly what we should be doing. And so you're saying that we should just go ahead and spend this money and allocate this money without knowing what all those things are. Because I haven't received a report about all the storage and the employees and all that. We haven't really had a full day discussion about the staffing. We have not. We've gotten reports, this is what they would like, but we haven't gotten that. So to say that we are going to have this, we are going to do that, but we don't have that information it's right, we need that information, but just to just spend it and just say, well, it'll be okay, that's not our role. Our role is to be fiscally accountable for how we spend the money and getting the report. What I'd like to know is, when did the RFP go out? And like, how long has it been since we sent that out? Why haven't we gotten the report before? So I just wanted to know when that was.
So the funding was identified in the 218, I believe, capital projects, if not the 219. The project did go out earlier this spring. We've been working with a consultant. And unfortunately, we have not had the time to complete that with our staff and the consultant due to other priorities that we had of trying to get bridges open and closed and road projects and other projects. So staff have a lot of different things that we're trying to work on and trying to get all those people together to have this discussion and ensuring that we're having all of our staff have input into it about how do we do the efficiencies, going right to those staff and asking them, what do they see? How do they see it? How can we help them operate better? How can we provide better locations for our facilities? How can we provide better storage for our equipment? Because we currently rent out space, that we currently lease out spaces throughout the community to store our existing vehicles. So we're having an additional operational cost there. And so it is taking just time for us to be able to review all of that and bring back a thorough report for council to discuss with all the items that you've been raising today. If you want to look at it as why do we need to put money set aside, we do that for everything that we do in the budget. We are doing a 10-year forecast. We're setting aside money and allocating money away to say, here are things that we're coming up and we're needing to look at in order to be able to do the projects. This is money to say, if it comes up, the council decides, no, we're just going to repair the existing buildings, to Councillor McCray's point, Councillor McElwain's point, then we have $500,000, and I would assure you that $500,000 will not repair the buildings we currently have. And so if we don't even have that $500,000 to not build a new operations center and just do repairs to our existing buildings, we will still be operating existing buildings that are not servicing the needs and the health and safety of our residents, and we're not efficiently spending our taxpayers' dollars by providing proper and efficient operations.
Dan?
And just to add to what Andy's saying, I just want to clarify that the $500,000 will not be spent, and we will not incur debt until a decision is made by council on January 27th. So it's a placeholder in the 2020 budget, and we will not incur the debt or spend any of the money until council makes that decision.
Thanks for clarifying that. The same with every project. Councillor Dunsmore. Okay. Anything new on this? Councillor McElwain?
When we had our previous budget meeting, At the time, I voted in favor of going forward with this 500,000 still in there, based on the fact we are going to have a report before our budget, final budget decision. I can't, in good conscience, vote to spend 3% tax hike, basically, what is $500,000 works out to, on something that we don't know if we need it yet or not. That's 3% tax hike on something that has not been identified.
Anything new? Okay, any other, moving on to other aspects of the capital project? Councilor Kitchus?
Line number 9, the employment land strategy. Didn't we just have a economic development strategic plan done like maybe a year and a half ago? So
was
I'm
one
just
of the
wondering what this one actually is, like what's involved with that one.
That was one of the recommendations that came out of that action plan.
But what exactly is that?
Bringing on a new stream of employment lands. That was one of the, I think, number 2 recommendation from the Economic Development Action Plan. Councilor Kitchus?
Why do we need another $50,000 to know what we already know? Like Councillor Van Leeuwen was just saying, we don't want to have these consultants on stuff that we actually know.
Well, he was talking about something else. We would never spend money on things we already know. So this $50,000 will get staff to explain again what this $50,000 is for. Brett?
Well, as you mentioned, one of the key recommendations is that we pursue the development of employment lands, which we are doing. And but aligned with that is the strategy of looking at what lot sizes we're looking at, who we're marketing to, what types of businesses we're trying to attract. That's been part of the discussion around this table and part of the strat plan discussion. So that's one of the recommendations that McSweeney made, aligned with pursuing the employment lands. Who are we marketing it to, what kinds of lot sizes, what kinds of businesses, and all that stuff. So that's the strategy, to take the land that we acquire, turn it into kind of shovel-ready status.
And there's just costs associated with doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And that was a council-approved document, right?
Yes.
Councilor Kitchus?
We have, I think it was 2017, we took $370,000 for the South Fergus development, and we've allocated that. And I thought it would be a 2-year in a row. That's how it was projected, but that's been, so we have already, of taxpayers' money, a large chunk of that South River development studies monies. That's already gone. So why are we just keep on adding more funds when we have that in a reserve somewhere?
I'm not seeing the connection between those two things. Does somebody else see it?
Like the South Fergus development land money is development charge money that came from our development charge fund to fund the future servicing and studies that need to be done for the future servicing of the lands in the south end of Fergus. The money that we've set aside for this employment land strategy is coming from the OLG funds that council directed, that some can be allocated towards economic development. And it's one of the recommended to implement the strat plan. So it's 2 different pools of money that we're talking about. So the South Fergus land is employment, or is a development charge project identified in our development charges bylaw, and that's where that money is in a reserve. And through our capital project, we're working with the developers that own the land down there to bring that forward with some of that development charge money. But this is different money. It's coming from the OLG funding. So it's not taxpayer money at all that we're talking about here.
So two different pools of money, two different
Two
projects.
different pools, yeah.
Councillor Dunsmore?
But if I'm hearing you right, we're talking about how we're going to divide up the land and how we're going to market it properly. So this is, a lot of this is a marketing strategy, which is what some of us have been asking for a while.
Correct.
Thank you.
Anything else from the capital budget? Councillor Kittrus?
Number 27, was that added to this budget? I didn't see that before.
What page are we on?
152?
Through Mayor Linton. So that's one of our boundary roads with our neighbor to the south, Guelph Township of Guelph-Aramasa. And this was added to the budget in 2018, I believe. It was in last year's budget as well. So this is our share of that project. So for boundary roads, as council may recall, we share costs, capital costs, 50-50. So this would be our financial contribution to Guelph-Aramasa's capital project. They've also earmarked $300,000 in their capital budget to do the asphalt resurfacing. So this is the road. It's kind of lines up with County Road 22 at the south end. Comes to Highway 6 to County Road 7. It's in really rough shape.
Both of them at the same time. Dan?
This project was included in the pre-budget meeting we had on September 9th. So it was part of what was discussed in the pre-budget meetings.
Okay, thanks. Mark?
And I can also confirm that in the 2019 budget, it was sitting in the 2020 year.
Okay. Councillor McElwain? Just hit your mic there.
I had a question about a line item which I had to find. Oh, there it is. It's number 69 on page 155. It's a negative number concerning the Salem Bridge, and I just don't know what that is, how you get a negative number in the capital budget.
Mark?
Yeah, this is part of a county tender that went out, and we actually had over budgeted for it in the past. So we thought, since the project's still ongoing, it's still open in our books, we would adjust it through the budget. We do this periodically from year to year. There's another project that's like, I think it's actually item 1. Okay? You'll see a couple of these every year.
Councillor Kittrus?
I think I'd like to discuss the OLG funds for the arts and cultural. There's here for the theater, $5,000 sign. And then there's also a rural heritage thing that's OLG's. And we got 2 presentations about the OLG funds for the arts. And I was wondering if we could discuss that at this time, since they're all these capital budget items.
We can discuss it now, or we could wait till after the report's done and discuss the delegations. Because when we discuss the delegations, we're gonna have to handle the festival, the arts, and we probably make sense to wrap that in a discussion about what we want to do with that new funding source. So I'd suggest that we get through the reports first and then come back and discuss that in its entirety, because we'll just duplicate the conversation, I think. Councillor Kittrus?
We received in the urban forestry a report about number of trees and all that stuff. Here, there's another $250,000. And I'm just wondering where that, how this money is allocated. Is that part of that? Because I was understood that that was like, we were talking about the operations part of it. So really, we were talking about $300,000? Okay.
So that report Matthew had yesterday outlined operating and capital costs.
Okay.
So from previous years as well as future years. So this will be, and Pat probably has more details, but more regarding around continuing with the Amherst ash borer, tree removal, tree replacement. Mark pounded it out yesterday that the tree brush and tree removal in the operations budget for public works are being reduced because a lot of it is now being covered through the capital for the Amherst ash borer program.
Yeah, Pat?
Just to add to that, so Matthew Land prepared a report, which is independent of the budget book, but it's on the agenda, and he spoke to that. So if you open that up, he actually breaks down what he projects in 2020 for each item to create the $250,000. So if you have that, that's the summary he prepared and where those funds are being allocated.
Yeah, 7.1 Urban Forestry Annual Summary Report.
It's not in the budget.
Part of the agenda.
It's on the agenda. So if you want, I can get you a hard copy of that. Okay, I'll go do that.
Anything else, Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Just looking at item number 75 on page 155, Sportsplex Campground Hydro Upgrades. Is that related to the Scottish Festival's request?
It's not related to the request, it's just this is a grant they've already received, and it's the partnership between Fall Fair Township Festival. What they requested was, the overall project is about $180,000. They have approval or have a grant money with partnerships of us contributing 13,000 of our money, and the 52 is for the entire project of the phase one. The grant money they requested yesterday, the money they funded Tuesday night was for the phase two, which is a total of $180,000.
Yeah, follow up.
So if this is for phase one of that project, are we putting any money into phase two of that project?
That's for council's discussion, as that's what their request was on Tuesday.
Councillor Kitchus?
On that item, it says the budget is 52, but the allocations, oh, you're taking 13 from reserve too. Okay, that's fine, sorry.
Councillor McCray?
Yeah, just follow up. So that initial 13,000 that we gave, did that come out of the OLG funding or something else?
Mark?
I believe it's general capital reserve, but I can tell you in a second. Yeah, it's general capital reserve.
Anything else on the capital? Councillor Kitchus?
In the urban forestry, the ash removal of woodlots, is that our woodlots?
Yes.
Where are they? Are they the urban ones or the rural ones?
It's a combination of them. Anything else on capital? Councilor Kitchers?
Do we receive several quotes for the contract work?
Do we follow our procedural, our procurement bylaw with this work?
Yes, I can confirm that whether it's a pruning project, a planting, tree removal, stub grinding, we go through this process of the procurement procedure. So if it's over $5,000, we are receiving 3 quotes.
Councilor Kitchers?
I was wondering, where does the orientation budget fit in a budget? We don't have one, we won't have one for this year, but is it like a capital project budget, or is it an operational part of a budget?
Council orientation?
Yeah, so council orientation is included in the election budget. So we contribute that over the 4 years to ensure that we have the money for the election as well as the orientation.
Anything else on capital? Okay, vehicle and equipment replacement, I think we did already, didn't we? Yep. Environmental supported equipment replacement forecast, did we do that? We did that. 10-year capital forecast, did that? Oh, that's part of the capital, yeah. Header delegations. No information, no decision from council or anything from the Urban Forestry Annual Summary Report. Matthew went through that. Councilor McCray?
Can we go back to the
10-year?
10-year capital forecast? There's just a line item I'd like to ask a
Sure.
question about.
Yeah.
So,
I'll tell you.
page 233. It's just the comment 2010-177, future parkland, 16 hectares. We have it sitting out there, it's sort of approximately 1.9 million. Has there been any consideration given to the possibility of approaching the GRCA to see if maybe we can get some sort of arrangement with some of their land that's sitting within our township that's close to, say, some of our hamlets, urban centers, that maybe we can maintain their property in return for getting use of the land, similar to what we have with Victoria Park, without actually having to go out and purchase land, if that would be something to consider as cost saving.
Yeah, this funding is actually identified to meet the recreation parks requirement for future sports field parkland and acreage with regards to providing active recreation land. So we do try to do those other options with other partners and things, but this is more for table land for being able to do active sports within the identified requirements for our future growth.
Okay, 8.1, community impact grant recommendations. And we have a report from Dorothy. Okay. Well, hopefully. Welcome, Dorothy. Community Impact Grant recommendations.
Thank you. Good morning. You have in front of you the report for the Community Services Advisory Committee recommendations to the grants that we received. We received a total of 12 applications totaling $44,987. Sorry, I'm out of breath. I was running. Catch my breath. We were in a very unique situation this year by having more funding available than applications that came in. So it was a much easier task for the committee. So they are recommending, they've attached the recommendations that they're proposing. There was one applicant that applied for $5,000, and upon reviewing the application, there was $750 that were was ineligible expenses. So we deducted that from their ask. There was also another application with the Central Wellington Chamber of Commerce, and the committee felt that their application was not meeting the criteria of the grant. So they denied that application of $5,000. So the total asks, or the total recommendations out of that $44,000 is $39,237. That was my report that I submitted, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Dorothy, and thanks to the committee for all their work in going through this. I know it takes a lot of their time. Hopefully it took a little less time this year than last year, because I know that they spent a lot of hours going through this, so appreciate that. Questions from council? Councilor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you. Just for clarity's sake, the remaining funds sit in reserve for the, let's say, through the year emergency asks or new grants that could possibly come up? Just a confirmation.
Mark's nod was confirmation for me, too.
Okay, I have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approves the grant allocations as outlined in Appendix A to report CS 2019-17 dated November 25th, 2019. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor McCray, second by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Sorry to make you run here.
Dorothy, can you just get Councillor McElwain? I think that's why he's.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah.
That's why he's stepped up.
Okay, so the next item, 8.2, fees and charges bylaw, report from, in your package from Dan Wilson. Did you have enough time for your coffee, Councillor McElwain? I know we went pretty fast there.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Just to reiterate some of the comments we made on Tuesday regarding fees and charges, this is an integral part of the annual budget process. The decisions made as part of the fees and charges report directly impact the budget from a user fee revenue perspective. Some of the major impact areas, Parks and Recreation in terms of user fees for different facilities and parks, Fire Department in terms of revenue generated there, cemeteries, and corporate services in general, building and planning fees. So all of these alternate sources of revenue that we have that help alleviate the burden on taxation. We're looking at a general increase of 1.8% to the user fees for 2020, which was the direction provided by council in pre-budget meetings. We do have some that staff are recommending do not increase at all for 2020, or in some cases they're actually being reduced. And as I've mentioned on Tuesday, that's because we do a market comparison to make sure that we're remaining competitive in certain areas. And in some cases, pressure dictates that we shouldn't be applying the 1.8%. We do have some areas that are increasing at rates slightly different than 1.8%. For example, in fire, we have fees that are dictated by MTO, and they are going up at 1.7% for 2020. We have a couple of changes that staff are recommending that were actually brought up as part of the budget discussions on Tuesday. One was the grading damage deposit fees that are through the Building and Planning Department. We are recommending an increase of 50% for 2020, and that is to align ourselves from a cost recovery perspective for the work involved in dealing with these grading damage deposits. And I believe Mark had brought that up when we went through the planning budget. We mentioned a different fee structure within infrastructure services for road occupancy and access permits, and that is shown within that schedule of the fee and charges bylaw. And as well, the water wastewater rates are going up as per the water wastewater rate study. 2.5% for water, 4% for wastewater, and we will be redoing that study in 2020 to determine rates for 2021 and beyond. The proposed bylaw is attached to my report. That shows all of the fees and charges by department, and staff would happy to answer any questions that council may have on that.
Thanks, Dan. Questions from council? Okay, Councillor McElwain?
The only one actually that stood out to me when I was looking through this was the raise in fees and charges for shinny hockey versus public skating, and I just, one was being held as is, and the other one, shinny hockey, was going up 20%, and I just didn't understand why.
Pat, you gonna take a stab at it?
There's a couple of reasons for that change. One is when we do a market look at what other communities are charging for shinny, we're below the market rate for shinny. The other thing that we've done is we've have a new program called Pickup Hub, and it's a software where people online go and sign up for shinny, and we've had some great success this season with that. So there's nothing worse than showing up for a shinny program and having only 3 participants, because there's not very good game. The idea is that through Pickup Hub, which we have outsourced, that group puts online all of our shinny games, and as a user, you can go on there and sign up for a game and look and see who else has signed up to make sure that there's enough people for the game if you make the effort to go to the arena. And we have seen uptake in our shinny as a result. So they are taking a small percentage. I'm going to say it's 10% of the fee that we collect for shinny for that service. So that is why we increased our rate, so that we would not see reduction in our overall revenue from shinny, but I think in the end we're going to see a greater increase in revenue because we have greater participation.
Anything else from council? Councillor Kitchers?
I was wondering about the cemetery charges, whether we could, in the KG report, it says of the comparators that we had there, that we had the second highest cemetery charges. And I was wondering whether we could, stabilize that so we're not as high.
I just want to, for the record, I just want to make sure that we're reading that KPMG report when it comes to jurisdiction reviews with a grain of salt. All that is coming from a pretty high level look at different service levels. So most of it's coming from FIR data, and there hasn't been a deep dive into that. We're comparing apples to apples with the different jurisdictions. So that was meant as a way to provide a little bit of context, but it definitely wasn't intended to be something that we use to make spending decisions, that's for sure. Do you want to comment on that, Dan?
Just a few comments on cemetery fees. We did increase cemetery fees generally by the 1.8% for 2020. There was a master plan completed a number of years ago that recommended specific rates to be set at competitive levels, and we've just been applying inflationary factors since then. I know staff did do a market comparison when we reviewed the fees for 2020 and felt that applying the 1.8%, we would still be competitive for cemeteries in the area. And the other area I want to point out is we do have significant pressure on our cemetery capital reserve. It's in a negative balance. It's going into a further negative balance as a result of planned activity for 2020, and we really need the fees and charges for cemeteries to be set so that we can start becoming more revenue neutral in the cemetery area. We technically should be looking at increases higher than inflation, but we stuck to inflation for 2020.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you, and I would like to remind council that we did set a policy that says that cemeteries should be a revenue neutral aspect, so that, but with the cemetery master plan, when we looked at the cost to build the master plan and divided by how many plots we can get, then that would be considered your revenue neutral. So we've sort of set the ball rolling that says we need to actually have these cemetery fees. So we need to be careful that one policy decision and design and application doesn't then suddenly get bumped out when we look at our budget and the later factors. So I think we've set that ball into a place, kind of thing. So.
Councillor Kitchus?
I was just asking about that because we did, when we were talking about earlier about how the fees were determined, that we would look at the market also and decide how the fees would be applied. And I've had some comments from residents about the fees and how they probably just bury themselves in the backyard.
Okay, read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Center Wellington pass a bylaw to establish the 2020 fees and charges for various services provided by the municipality and to repeal bylaw 2018-64 as amended. Move for that recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to Ontario Regulation 2284-09. And I'm turning it over to Mark.
Okay, through you, Mayor Linton. This is a housekeeping item. This report has been required for probably the past 10 years. So basically what OREG 284 states is that it allows for the exclusion of capital asset amortization and post-employment benefit estimates in municipal budgets. I'm not aware of any municipalities that actually would budget for capital asset amortization and post-employment benefits within their budget. Reason being is capital asset amortization is a reflection of historical cost and not replacement cost. Therefore, it's not really a good basis for budgeting. Standard practice is what the township does, which is, use life cycle costing and use replacement costs to budget towards, not historical costs. Budget towards historical costs, you won't have enough money when the item is due for replacement. So basically, if this report is not accepted annually, then the township would have to include amortization in the tax levy.
So it's just something that we have to do by
Yes.
regulation.
And no other municipalities that I'm aware of actually would budget for amortization.
Okay, I read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington adopt report, I lost my place, adopt report COR 2019-83 regarding additional financial disclosure requirements for the 2020 budget year pursuant to Ontario Regulation 284/09. Move for that recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor Kitchus. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, so the last thing that we have is to pass to look at 8.4 2020 in the draft budget report. So before we do that, and then we'll go kind of around the room and have last discussion on that one, and then we'll call the question after we've all had an opportunity to say our piece. But before we do that, we're going to take a 10-minute break because I think we need it, and then we'll get back here at 20 after 10. Okay, we'll get back out of here at 10:20. Sorry, my apologies. I meant to, before we have the final discussion on the draft budget, we obviously have to have a discussion about the three asks that came out of the delegation. The fourth one, the Fergus BIA, that's included in the budget right now. They're not asking for anything different, so I'm not including that. But we had the Lower Center for the Arts come with their request to keep the 100,000 K in the budget as it currently sits. We had the Scottish Festival come and talk to us about their plans to do something with 100 K if we wanted to give them the 100 K. And we also had Marty from the Elora BIA come and talk about the outlook over the gorge. So what I propose to do first, let's have a quick discussion first about the outlook over the gorge. And then after that, let's talk about the Elora Center for the Arts Scottish Festival and that whole new fund of money that has been allocated to arts, culture, and heritage as one topic. Is that okay? So let's deal with the gorge part first. So remember back to Marty's conversation, he was talking about the loss of access to a view of the To the Time, and suggesting that the township put money in the budget to do an outlook over, a substantial outlook over in Victoria Park, so you had a better view of the To the Time. I know that staff have talked about, they have taken some of the brush and the trees away from that. So I just want Andy to talk about what we could do that wouldn't really require budget, and to see what council thinks about that firstly.
Right, thank you, Mayor Linton. So, as you saw in that photograph that was provided, there already is a plaque, and that plaque went in many years ago about the view of the To the Time from Victoria Park. We do go back on every so often to keep that view. There are cedars that are growing out of the gorge edge and are at the top, and so we have done some pruning of that in the spring. And we noticed in that picture is the person was standing a little bit further back than what most are standing up by the fence line. We could take out two of those cedar trees and just cut them down a bit so that there's a better view quarter to it. So we can do that very simply for a better view. I think my comment was, when you take a picture, you actually, it's nice to have the trees in front to picture view it, but that's, we can do that. Second of all, just two comments with regards to, just a reminder to council that we are currently working with the property owners, Pearl Hospitality, that there will be a full south side of the river that is being developed for view quarters, and even from the, for those that were at the Pyre Dam by Pearl. That area is also open for view quarters up to the To the Time, as well as I know in speaking with the owners of the Elora Mill, they do allow, and I think Marty did mention this, that they do allow people to go onto their property. They only manage people not going on a property when they have a big event going on and they have parking issues. So they do allow people to walk down. They prefer people not parking on their property, but they do allow so that they can see it between, as the overlook from between the spa and the mill. So those are three current things that will be continuing to work for significant views of the To the Time.
So that providing a little bit of context, does anybody want to move forward with requesting that council put budget in to move towards this, or at least study this, or cost it out, or something like that? Any motions on the floor? Councilor McElwain?
I'd like to make a motion that we, that council study what it would cost to put a platform, a viewing platform out from Victoria Park.
Second by Councillor Foster. Any other discussion on that one? Councillor Van Loon?
Just a quick question. What does it cost us when we say to study? Like, are we looking at going out for an RFP on a proposal? Like, what are we going to just use some of our experiences on other areas? What does that mean? Just to clarify, because again, we're talking about funds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this one would be way outside of our expertise of into the bedrock, and I do know as Pearl was developing their property, they did actually have to work with the GRCA, they had to work with the ministry, as well as looking at the rock stabilization and what any, because it would have to be cantilevered and tied into the rock. So it will be substantial amount of additional professional assistance to be able to take a look at that, just to even see what would be feasible there.
Councilor Dunsmore?
So I have two questions on this. Well, one, I would prefer, my option that I would prefer is to take down those two trees that I see in this picture that are in the way of a good view. Is this, Victoria Park is something we have a long-term lease agreement with the Grand River Conservation Authority. So we'd need to seek their permission to do anything, particularly if we have to drill into the escarpment to hold this thing up. So I'm wondering if we even have the authority to build something on their property.
So where the location of this is, I believe, is our township property, because we own the promenade all the way around the Lower Gorge, so it would not be, I don't believe it's on the GRCA portion of the property that they own, but because it is overlooking the river, we would have to work with the GRCA and probably Ministry of Natural Resources, because they're the ones that, for bridges, as we did with the bridges, we had to go through that process. So we would have to look out to both of those agencies to see what approval permits would be required, what type of structure they would allow, and whether they even allow the work into the bedrock, into the gorge itself.
Councilor McCray?
I have some concerns about this idea in terms of it's destroying a heritage view. Frankly, we've already seen changes on the north side. We're going to see changes on the south side. To now add a viewing platform that sticks way out over the gorge, I don't think it's appropriate.
From my perspective, I'd concur with that. I think way more. I'm not convinced that most residents in Central Wellington would like that. So I'd need a whole lot more discussion prior to personally being in favor of something like that. Councilor Kitchus?
I think that we should investigate this. We should sort of see what the cantilever would be, or just a regular viewing platform, like on the rock. So there's just options. I agree with Councillor Dunsmore that the trees could be cut down almost immediately for a solution. And then we could sort of see about the feasibility of, obviously the cantilever is going to be a lot more expensive than just a platform, and which is maybe more free of brush and more people can view it at the same time, whereas you have really one person at a time when you do a little view, and there's kind of like people crowding around each other. So I still think that we should maybe look into this. I think we should cut the trees so that we can get the view sooner, and I think it's a good idea because we are a tourist area. Tourism is part of our it's heritage and tourism, and that is what people would like to see, and there is a significant amount there as people go through, and we know that more and more people are going through. If you've walked along that area there, it's just filled with roots and tripping, and it's, I think that a very stable platform might be a solution to that. So,
just to clarify though, that Marty representing the BIA was not asking for a platform. He was asking for a cantilever platform. So that was the nature of his discussion. So we'll have to make that clear in the motion, which I think was clear. It was something that juts out. Otherwise, we have what we need. I also want to just make a comment on that last statement. If you've been there recently and you see how improved that pathway is as far as routes and a fence, and we've done some really good job. And I just wanted to take a minute to kind of compliment staff on what's been done at Victoria Park. If you compare what you see there now as opposed to 5 years ago, we've done a really good job. So if there is an opportunity to remove a couple trees and improve that as naturally as possible, I think that's a pretty good first step. But Andy?
Just as Mayor Linton was speaking there, I do want to remind council, we do have a Victoria Park master plan that was approved by council, and we did go through a whole public process with that a number of years ago. It goes back to when I was Parks and Rec Director. And I do know that during those discussions, there was a lot of comments about, the big challenge for Victoria Park is actually managing the park with the amount of traffic that we have going through the park. It's a very natural park. We already have the issue, people can go down the stairs, and we need to look at some repairs to the stairs to get down to the Irvin Creek. And you can actually view the Truth of Time as you walk down the base of the Irvin Creek to be able to see at that level as well. So there are other opportunities around the community. I can tell you that when we've done some of this pruning and have the company in for the view corridor to the David Street Bridge, and Matt's not here, but he will recall that when we did do some of these opening up of the view corridors, there were many people in the park that were not pleased about the fact that we were opening up those. This is a natural area in the community that people look for as a heritage park as well.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. I just want to make sure that it's accurately the way that Councilor McAway moved it. So I'm going to read it and let me know if I'm on the right track here. That the Council of the Township of Center Wellington directs staff to investigate the installation of an outlook for the Truth of Time at the location that was identified by the Elora BIA delegation. Is that Councilor McLean?
Thank you. My intent was also, I guess, a little different than you had just said a few moments ago, or Andy. I don't think it needs to be a 20-foot cantilever necessarily. I think looking into what options are best is really what I'm talking about, and something improved from what we have today, because as Marty pointed out, yes, the south side is going to be opened up, but you're not really seeing the Truth of Time from the south side. You're seeing the back of it, not the front, the famous front look view of the Truth of Time. So that's what people go to see, and I think that they need a better view of it.
Okay, so yeah, nothing there indicated, like, I know Marty gave a little bit more explanation about the 20 by 20, and that's not reflected there, so I think we're good. More comments, Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Kelly. Do we wish to set a budget amount for this item? We're basically trying to determine if it's feasible, whether it makes engineering sense, whether it makes aesthetic sense. Do we wish to amend to include a budgetary amount?
I mean, that's a good question. Direct staff to investigate, I don't know. We got to identify. Councillor Foster?
For example, because it's an escarpment, we may need engineering. We obviously will, and one option may be to cantilever into the side of the escarpment. One option may be to build upon the top, just so that you can get an outward view. That may be more feasible and require less engineering. So the point here is, we'll need some kind of engineering work to determine if it's even feasible and how much it might cost. Therefore, for the budget, we may wish to add an amount to the motion, so that we do not proceed too far in studying something that's totally not feasible.
That's true. So a mover and a seconder, do you want to add a budget to your motions?
I don't particularly want to add a budget, no.
Are you okay with moving it without a budget? Okay. Call the question then. Do you want me to read it again? Yes, please. Okay. I want to be clear. The Council of the Township of Center Wellington directs staff to investigate the installation of an outlook for the Truth of Time at the location identified by the Elora BIA delegation during budget deliberations. Councillor Kittrus?
It doesn't say cantilever there. It just says an outlook.
Yes.
So that's not, there's other options there.
Yes. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's defeated. Okay, so now,
I'd like to put another motion on the table, because
Okay.
what we just did was turn down turn down the deck. I would like to put a motion forward that we remove those two trees and clear the view.
direction's okay. Do you want to put an actual, you can put in a motion, and
So
staff are going to do
direction
it
is
anyway.
fine, we just tell staff to go cut
Staff are
those
gonna
trees
do it.
down?
Yep.
Okay, would somebody please cut those two trees down?
Okay, so let's get into the other discussion. So again, we have a whole new process, a whole new allocation funding stream for arts, culture, and heritage. No definition has really gone into that. We just recognize that there was a need in the community for sustainable funding when it comes to arts, culture, and heritage. So right now, we've kind of replicated what we did last year when we put $100,000 to Laura Center for the Arts. So that's where the budget sits right now. We had a couple delegations, so we just want to open that up. In addition to the $100,000 for Laura Center Arts, we have $30,000 also that's coming out of that fund for what two other areas again, Dan?
We have two other projects being funded out of that reserve fund. One is the theater exterior digital signage for $5,000. And the second was the Rural and Cultural Heritage Landscape Registry, which is partially funded through this at $13,750. So both of those are township projects.
Okay, thank you, but related to heritage, arts, and culture. Okay, so council hasn't defined what arts, culture, heritage is at this point. We have really no process, but we know we have $130,000 this year to put into this fund. Right now, we know where it sits in the budget. So let's open up the discussion about that. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you. So I've been scratching away trying to figure out what I want to do here, because this was one that I felt like I really pulled out of the budget. Just like when we allocated funding from the OLG to the economic development team, they had a strategic plan and they had to go through that process in the background. Anytime we do that, and we've spoken a lot about plans here today as to what are we going to do with the funds. We have processes for or policies for grant money. We've got policies for pretty much everything. I feel like this is the one where we kind of put it forward as arts, cultural heritage. And we haven't really defined how we would split that up. What are they using the funds for in that? And I guess it really opened my eyes, especially when we started getting Fergus Scottish Festival and those things. There's going to be a lot of good asks. I think that the Elora Center for the Arts, the Fergus Scottish Festival, there's lots of good asks coming in here. But I'd like to have a policy before we allocate those funds, just so that the funds may still go the same way that they're actually placed on this budget. But I'm wondering if council would be in support of actually removing the individual allocations from the funding. So just taking where we've put it on there, removing those individuals of the $130,000 from the individual aspects of the budget and allocating it to a reserve called the Arts Cultural Heritage Reserve, and having a set of guidelines or policy built by staff and brought back forward for council to approve. And then that way, anybody who allocates that funding can, I don't know if it would be parks and whoever would allocate that, then would look at it and say, this fits the guideline and here's where we would best feel that the funds would go forward. So it kind of sets the same stage, especially because this is not a one-off, but we've allocated these funds in there. So I really want to know that council can speak towards that as well. So I guess through my scribbles on different papers would really be removing the individual allocations of funding and put into a reserve for the arts, cultural heritage on those allocations until a policy can be produced. I don't know if that means like you need 3 months to do that or 6 months to do that. I'd look to staff, but let's put a date. I would recommend a date as well to that. So I look to council for comment.
So let's just answer that in one timing. If we did move towards policy and procedure, how much time do you think that would take for staff to be able to come up with something?
We learned a lot of lessons through the Jack R. McDonald policy and allocation component, so it does take longer than what we all anticipated last time. We still have applications going through the Jack R. McDonald that have been awarded that still have not got off the mark. So I guess for clarification, are we looking at a policy development and then an application process, similar to what we did at the Jack R. McDonald, so all groups would have an opportunity to apply? And if that's the case, then I would suspect it would be, probably the first half of the year, we can come back to council with what that would look like, and then open up an application process for the later part of the year. And then, as my understanding, we would then allocate the money that we put into the reserve to whatever organizations council so wished at that point in time. Does
So
that-
can I, yeah, can I follow?
Follow on, yep.
So I guess, so what we're, at least we know then the funds would still be allocated within this year? Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, I was just thinking, so at least we know that the funds would still be allocated within this year if we can agree on this policy. So that's important. So I'd like to put that motion forward and then see if we can get a seconder and then possibly have a conversation on it. How we,
So if you want to put a motion, let's get the wording of it right.
okay. So basically that we remove the individual allocation of the funding from the OLG in regards to the arts, cultural heritage, and place it in a reserve until a policy for an allocation policy can be drafted by staff.
Okay, so I don't know, what if like Carrie's been typing here while you've been talking, so what about something like this? Because I think this might do the trick. Let's see. That the Council of the Township of Center Wellington directs staff to place the OLG cultural heritage and arts allocation in reserve, and further that staff bring forward a policy outlining the application process for the distribution of funds. So taking it out is automatic if you place it in that reserve.
Yeah, so it's still in the budget, but yet it's just removed from the line item aspect of saying going exactly to these spots. So exactly, it's there, right? Okay.
Does that do? Is there do you have any problem with that wording? Does that provide the right kind of direction as far as the budget is concerned and moving out on a line item?
I think that wording works. Just basically what it means from a budgeting perspective is those three individual capital projects will cease to be capital projects. The money would just sit in the OLG Arts, Culture, and Heritage Reserve Fund until that policy would be developed and we get further direction from council at that point.
Okay, can I get yeah?
They could put the 100,000 in reserve and leave the other one separate.
Wanna do
It's all or
it.
nothing?
Yeah, no. So let's get a second and then we'll have open discussion. Seconder for that policy, the way it's worded. Oh, I'll second it. I want to get to the discussion part. Councilor Kitcheris, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Mayor. I would support that for next year. Because I just sort of feel like the Scottish Games are gonna, and the Arts Center and whatever we've allocated, they're gotta make plans. And if we have to wait for May or something for the policy, and then we have to have committees, and there'll be more people, because it'll be totally open, I think we should just, I would support that if it's for next year. And then the staff has a year to come up with that, and we're going to start deliberations for next year in June as our thing, so then it would just fit properly for next year. So I would support that, but for next year, not right now. I think we need to decide the funds right now.
So you'd be okay with laying out the 130 the way it's already identified for this year, and then establishing a policy for next year?
No, I think that we need to have a discussion about the 130.
Oh,
for
I
this
see, but
year.
you're okay with making that discussion without having the policy process for this year?
Yeah, and then next year, instead of it being this year, next year, it goes into the reserve, or whatever the policy
Yeah.
is.
Okay. Councilor Dunsmore?
Okay, I find myself agreeing with Councillor Kitchers. I think we made some discussions in September, and I think some community groups have moved forward with their budgeting based on those discussions that they heard from there. So we have essentially two new people to the table that came as delegations last night. If my math serves me correct, we started with 130 and we've got roughly 14,000 spent. So we have a balance of 109. I'm okay with
Sorry,
what you're
sorry,
saying.
just cut you off there. Let's make sure those numbers were right.
So 130,000 is being allocated to the OLG Arts, Culture, and Heritage Reserve Fund. Of that, within the 2020 draft budget, 118,750 is being allocated to three specific projects. So 100,000 to Elora Center for the Arts, 5,000 to the theater signage, and 13,750 to the Rural Cultural Heritage Landscape Registry. So that leaves 12,000, 11,000 left.
Okay.
Go
So
ahead.
the 100,000, I mean, that's what we said in September, that we would look at putting it in. I don't recall saying we were going to give it all to the Elora Center for the Arts, but what I'm proposing, based on what we heard last night, is I'd like to give 50 to the Scottish Festival, 50 to the Elora Center for the Arts, put the rest in a reserve, and let's develop a policy.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linden. I like what Councillor Van Leeuwen is proposing, is setting up a reserve specifically for the arts and then coming up with a policy. However, I went back and I looked at sort of the history of how did we get to the point where we put in our strategic plan that we're going to define and develop a partnership with the Elora Center for the Arts as part of a broader theme to support arts and culture in the community. So I remember we discussed as part of our strategic planning sessions the idea of developing an arts center to complement our 2 sports centers and senior center. We recognize the important role of arts within our community in terms of social well-being and economic development, and the fact that by partnering with ECFTA, we would provide a center to address the demand for an arts presence. That was all part of what we discussed way back then. Today, we're seeing arts groups gravitating towards the ECFTA. Riverfest has joined them. Elora Singers is in there. We see other small groups going in there, getting studio space. We're also seeing the outreach programs that they're doing with schools and other community groups. So it's already providing a vital need. Back in February 13th, I looked at the video. There we had the motion. The Council of the Township of Centre Wellington allocates $100,000 in funding in 2019 from excess LOG funds to the Elora Center for the Arts to be applied as outlined in option 3 of their funding submission, and staff continue discussions with the ECFT for more long-term solutions to support the arts. So there it was 6-1 in favor of that. I looked at the September 9th video. There we discussed $100,000 for 2020, with the understanding it would not be an ongoing amount, but over time would decrease based on the building audit. We were reminded that a building audit needed to be done to assess the costs associated with maintaining the historical building. This audit would assist us in determining how much funding we would consider going forward. The assumption was $100,000 for 2019 and $100,000 for 2020, and then we figure out what to provide for 2021 and beyond. So all I'm seeing is there has been an ongoing discussion about doing some sort of relationship with the Elora Center for the Arts. This $130,000 we're talking about in funding, I feel that somehow our relationship with the Arts Center is a bit different from that other funding. So I think we need to look at first, how are we defining this relationship with the Arts Center? Are we going to stick to our strategic plan, which we've identified to the community? This is what we're planning to do over the next 4 years. Or are we going to divert from it? Because we're sending a different message to the community if we're not standing behind what we've said we're going to do. So what I see as well with the Scottish Festival's application is what they're asking for is equipment upgrades to basically our Sportsplex facility. We funded that the last time through our Capital Reserve Fund. Maybe we should be looking at that request as being funded through a Capital Reserve Fund. So the $100,000 stays with the Elora Center for the Arts for 2020, and that what the festival is asking for is we get Capital Reserve Fund to pay for that upgrade, because it's going to benefit the whole Sportsplex as well. So that's just sort of my suggestion.
Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Kelly. The first point I want to make is we made this decision last year without a policy or a process, and I'm comfortable doing it again this year, and I'm fine with trying to develop it for 2021. The second point I want to make is we already have a practice or a process in place when we deal with the small community grants, and on Tuesday, we had 3 applicants come, and we can use that exact same process again, and therefore we can make a decision about this for the current year today. Thirdly, I want to speak in favor of giving the $100,000 to the Scottish Festival for a number of reasons. First of all, we have been very, very supportive of the Elora Center for the Arts. We have lent them money in the past. Last year, we gave them $100,000. And those are good things. The reason I like the Scottish Festival application is it's going to fund hard needed infrastructure that's going to benefit the festival. It's going to benefit the Fall Fair. It'll benefit Canada Day celebration. We're talking here about new electrical upgrades, for the campers at the festival, new electric upgrades for any groups that use the Sportsplex fields. And we're also talking about fixing an ongoing, long-standing problem, which is the driveway behind Pad B. It's virtually impassable when it potholes up. All of these things are part of Phase 2. And the whole community uses the Sportsplex. The whole community will benefit, including the arts community. And so I'm in favor of giving the 100,000 to the Scottish Festival this year. And I'd like to make a motion that we do that.
Yeah, we have a motion on the table, so why don't we get that motion out? Councilor Van Leeuwen first? Well, you want to, okay, we can't do any other motions until we deal with this motion, so as long as you're aware of that. Councilor McElwain?
Thanks. I differentiate slightly differently in that I agree with what Ian brought forward, but my logic is a little different in that the grounds at the Sportsplex belong to the township, and it is a township responsibility to make sure that it meets the needs of the community that it serves. Whereas the Center for the Arts is a publicly supported organization, a charity organization that serves the community. And I think I feel the same way, by the way, about purchasing a sign for the Fergus Grand Theatre. I don't really think that $130,000 that we are allocating from the OLG fund should be doing what should be capital projects for the township, basically, I guess is what I'm saying. I also agree with what Stephen had said, that changing our strategy at this point makes it almost impossible for either of those two organizations to move forward with their plans for 2020. By the time we came back with a new strategy and went through the process, the need would be 2021, not 2020, basically.
Councilor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you. Just want to comment on my own motion there. So I guess the problem was we chose to allocate those funds to the arts, heritage, and culture, and it doesn't, to me, I didn't differentiate between whether we actually did it within our township funding, our lands, or what we own, or whether we give it to a charitable organization. I don't see the difference. It was more that we were driving those needs, because if we're in the sports aspect, we still build in within our own township funds, so or our own township lands. The big one, last year when I did it, I was uncomfortable with it, but yet I could see that there was a strong need for the Laura Center for the Arts. I guess my difficulty is, in everything else that we've spoken about today, is we've really said, no, if we don't know where it's going to go, exactly how it's going to be spent, we're going to put it in that little bucket or that glass jar. And we've had extensive conversations on it. I can hear that obviously there may not be a shift to exactly what I'm saying, but I really strongly feel that there is an easy way to get that reserve going within 6 months. And for us to actually look at it and say, I can already hear around the table, we're going, well, who's the Scottish Festival? We're going to start drawing, we're going to tear the community apart by this grant versus actually building the community together, where they're going to grumble and say, well, you didn't even give us a chance, you just gave the money away. And we already have a potential motion to give it to the Scottish Festival. I'd like to see us to ensure that we bring this together and bring the community together and not tear it apart by allocating without, even though I hear what you're saying, Councilor McCray, like, yes, we've had those conversations, but in the past, the Scottish Festival wasn't at that table. So now today they're standing before us, and we're really presented with something that could begin a tear apart of community events. That's all I'm saying. I can be challenged on it. I'm willing to be defeated on it, but I think it is very important to put it in reserve first and then walk through that process. So I stay by my motion, but.
Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I appreciate your concern, Councillor Van Leeuwen. Certainly don't want to tear apart the community. I guess the challenge I have, and I'm thinking towards what Councillor McElwain said, is the money that we're proposing to give to the Fergus Grand Theatre for signage, that's township infrastructure. The money we're proposing to give to the Scottish Festival, that's also really township infrastructure. I feel that funding should be coming more out of capital reserve, whereas the actual arts and culture funding that we're proposing to set aside should be more towards charity groups, others that are providing a service to the community that aren't directly linked as our actual facility. That's sort of what I'm thinking in terms of how this 130,000 should be spent. It should be towards more of that type of organization, whereas we're not just taking the money out of one pocket and sticking it in our other pocket and say, oh, we've dealt with the arts community, which I see with this upgrade to the Sportsplex. I think really we should just deal with that as a capital reserve expense.
I think I just want to talk a little bit about that. And so what the Scottish Festival presented to us was improvements to our facilities that we happen to own that would suit their purposes. So we might not be getting to that for 10, 20, 30 years because it doesn't suit the community's purposes. But the reason that they'd want to invest in that is not just to build up our community facilities, but because it would suit their purposes. And by the way, it will also help us as far as our facility plan goes as well. So I do think there needs to be and as we're talking here, it becomes even more clear to me that policy is required, because there's a lot of discussions that we have to have. Like, do we treat public facility improvements the same way as we treat not-for-profit facility improvement? We have to have that discussion. So that is outstanding. So I'm glad to hear that council does want, at least for 2021, move towards a policy-driven allocation of these funds, because I think that's absolutely critical, or else I completely agree with Councillor Van Leeuwen that we are going to have a real difficult time allocating these funds if we don't have really clear policies and if we're not on the same page as council, for sure. But if we're open to kind of divvy that money out right now, if we can come to some sort of agreement right now without those policies, that's going to be the challenge. And that's where we're at right now, because we don't have any criteria. Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Kelly. A couple of points. First of all, when the Raceway first came to our community, there was a lot of acrimony, animosity, and a general principle established then was that our share of the proceeds from the OLG would be used for infrastructure, and that's what we have always done. So I don't see any difference here, whether we use it for arts infrastructure or in the past road and bridge infrastructure. The point was we allowed them to come and to honor those people who were opposed. We're going to use any allocation from the slots for infrastructure. We've always done that. The second point I want to make is we made this decision last year without a policy, and I see no problem with doing it one more time this year. The third point I want to make is everybody benefits from the infrastructure upgrades at the Sportsplex, the arts community and the entire community. And as the mayor said, it will help the Scottish Festival. It will help the fair. Those are long-standing, important arts and cultural things. So we're achieving that desire to support the arts community by investing in the infrastructure at the Sportsplex. That's the route I think we should do for this year.
Okay, so a couple things, and I want to make sure that we don't go completely off here, because we could. Firstly, the difference this year versus last year is now we have an official OLG policy that dictates that we put 5% to arts, culture, and heritage. We didn't have that last year, so that was a one-off last year. This year we have it, but we don't have a corresponding policy. I can understand that there's people, we've had in the documents for quite some time now that $100,000 is going to the Lower Center for the Arts, so that will be a hit to them if it doesn't happen. So we've kind of given, and Councilor McCray talked about the 6-1 vote, we've kind of given assurances that that was going that way. I think what we're going to have a challenge with today is we're making a decision. We have a couple groups now who have asked for the same amount. So we have my thing is to be very pragmatic. I think that we have to figure out a way to divvy up that $100,000 between the two organizations in a way that we can all live with. Unless somebody thinks that there's a way to get around that, we could be here all day having that discussion. But let's shoot down the motion first. I mean, let's vote on the motion first. And then we'll go from there.
Amend the motion, just amend the motion for 2021.
Yeah, I've got a
Policy
new
for
one here that you
2021.
might want to consider.
Okay, so what about if Councillor Van Leeuwen is supportive of a modification to this, is that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington direct staff to develop a policy outlining an application process for the distribution of OLG cultural heritage and arts funds for the implementation in 2021. Yes. Are you okay with that, or you want to vote on the motion as it was first? I'm okay with either way. I don't want you to do something that you're not comfortable with.
I believe that we should still do it for this year, but so I think we should vote on it. If
Okay,
you just want to
I'm okay
defeat
with
it,
that.
that's fine. I stand with where I stand, but I can understand if you don't. No, I'd like to.
No, he wants to
I'll
go
keep
with
that
it.
motion.
He
You-
knows he can withdraw it.
You can defeat it.
Okay, so Councillor Van Leeuwen moved it, I seconded it. All in favor? Opposed? So that's defeated. So now we go on to the next piece. So I have heard, okay, how about we deal with this? I have heard some. Point of order.
I've made a motion that we were going to deal with after.
No, you can't make a
recognize
motion
that.
when we're in another motion, so I'm still in order. And I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say first. So I would recommend, and this is, I've heard significant agreement that we develop a policy for 2021. I'd like to get that on the table and talk about 2021, then we'll go back and discuss the other piece. So I'm going to move a motion right now that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington direct staff to develop a policy outlining application process for the distribution of OLG cultural, heritage, and arts funds for the implementation in 2021. Seconded by Councillor Foster. Any discussion about a 2021 moving to a policy? All in favor? Okay, so that's handled. So now we have to deal with this year. So we've heard, let me just summarize here. We've heard people saying that it should go to, the 100,000 should go to the Laura Center for the Arts, as is in the draft budget. Other people say, another councillor is saying we want $100,000 that is going to the Scottish Festival for 2020, and another councillor is saying we want to divide the thing 50-50. So that's where we're at. Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Your Worship. I would like to make a motion that we give the 100,000 to the Scottish Festival over a 2-year period where we're doing this without a policy. If we were to agree to this, then we're talking about 200,000 over 2 years. Half would go to the Laura Center, as it already has, and my proposal would put half the money, 100 out of a total of 200 over 2 years, to the Scottish Festival. The festival is a major cultural attraction in our community, and we need to support it.
Okay, so we just passed that we're going to a policy in 2021. So we can't do anything in this motion that contradicts what we just passed.
There's no contradiction. I'm talking about this current 100,000.
But you said over 2 years.
Well, I'm referring to 2018 and 2019, yes. Or pardon me,
19,
2019 and 2020, I meant to say.
So over the next year.
No, last year, we gave 100 to the Elora. This year, we're dealing with another 100. The total over last year and this year is 200. My motion gives half, as we did last year, to the Elora Center. That's already done. I'm simply pointing out that half the money would go to, over this 2-year period that's about to end in 2020, that half would go to the Elora Center. That decision's already been made. And the current 100 in the 2020 year would go to the festival. And
Okay, so-
the reason I'm doing this is I'm talking about a 2-year period where we're dealing with this issue where we have not had a policy.
Okay,
So it's equality is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I know what you're getting at as far as equality goes, but I'm talking about the numbers. So we already last year allocated 100,000 to Laura Center for the Arts. That's done. This year, we've been asked for an additional 100,000 by Laura Center for the Arts. We've been asked for $100,000 to the Scotch Festival. So we have 2 requests this year for $100,000 each. Okay, so that last year is completed. Council made that decision. So we're talking about just 2020. Anybody who's gonna, put a motion forward to do something practical? Councilor Kittrus?
I'd like to put forward a motion to split the $100,000, $50,000 for the Laura Center of the Arts, and $50,000. Actually, I'd prefer to do $60,000 each, and then just put $2,000 from the reserve into the Heritage one, and skip the sign for the theater. And so then they're getting, each of those communities are getting a large portion. The Elora Center for the Arts, they send an email that they'll accept $50,000, you know. And I feel that the Scottish Games would definitely accept $60,000. So that would be my motion.
Okay.
I'd like to split the OLG funds, so the Elora Center gets 60,000, the Scottish Games gets 60,000, and then the remaining for the Heritage, that we add $2,000 from the reserve to do that. That's my motion.
Okay, so that's, okay, if you want to keep that, that's awesome. But we could do 55 and 55 and leave everything the way it is. Because there is 111,000 there, so we could do 55 and 55 if.
Okay, I'll
that
agree to
good?
that.
55
Are we gambling here?
Okay. So you've put a motion forward that's very close to what you were suggesting, Councilor Dunsmore. Are you going to second that? I'll second that motion. Are you going to third it? Well, I'm going to try and second it. I'll second. Okay. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Good work. That was tough. Okay, so that's good. And so in 2021, we'll move to a policy, and that'll be a fun process, just to let you know.
Policy and application process.
Yes. Okay, so that deals with the delegations. So moving on to our last item here, and that is, do we have to amend the draft? Do we have to amend the budget now? Oh, we'd have to amend the budget. So I'm gonna read the recommendation for the approval of the draft budget, and then we're gonna go around the room. Last chance for discussions. Do you want a couple minute break? Yes. Oh, do you? Okay, let's do a couple minute break. I want everybody to be here, obviously.
get here this morning?
Okay, we'll get things going back again here. So the last thing on our agenda now is our final draft budget. So I'm going to read a recommendation to get this on the floor. Councilor Macklin, yet?
I have a couple of general questions that don't really relate to comments on the final, on the motion. So wondering if we could just have any questions answered before we get into that particular part.
I guess I don't want to open it up for a whole discussion. I mean, are they fairly?
Well, I personally,
they-
you know, I mean, we are talking about the budget, so I think if a whole discussion is warranted, then we should have it. But I think my particular questions are fairly straightforward.
Okay, Councilor Macklin?
The first one is, I just wanted to ask what our surplus was in 2019 and what happened to it and where is it right now? You know, how much of it has been spent or how was it spent?
Yeah, the 2019 surplus, 2018 surplus, okay. It went into the general capital reserve. The amount, I'd have to look that up. It's in the budget though. Yeah, it's in the actual numbers. Just give me a second here. Just gotta find the.
Yeah, so just, Councillor McWayne, as per council policy, all the surplus goes into the general capital reserves to build up the capital. Council did not dedicate that to any other different funding this year as sometimes we've done in the past. Yep.
That's what I couldn't recall having generated anywhere. So knowing how much it is exactly was kind of, my point is that we've increased our, as is part of our policy, our transfer to the general capital reserve again this for 2020. And if we've already allocated the surplus from 2018, maybe we don't have to do, I'm just looking at ways that we can cut that 8.7 down to, or I mean 4.7 down to something a little bit more acceptable. So I'm just asking the question of, is there already money going into the general capital reserve that we don't have to make this extra donation this year?
Well, I think, you know, that's a pretty big question. I think Dan went through how we're making up some ground, but we're not making up nearly enough ground as far as increasing our capital reserves. I think you mentioned the difference. Mark was talking about the difference in 2013, the situation that we were in versus the situation we're in now. But if you remember that graph, we're still behind where we need to be, and we still have to make up some ground. So the budget that we have in front of us is staff's recommendation on how we're shifting money from our reserves and contributions to reserves to the capital budget. So I don't know if there's anything else that we have to talk. Do you have that number? Okay.
The 2018 surplus was $392,834. There was a report to council May, June, that recommended that be allocated to general capital reserve, and it was. We've considered that as part of our allocations of funds for the capital budget for 2020. Just to reiterate what Mayor Linton was saying, we are behind in our capital investments by approximately $300,000 for 2020 in comparison to the recommendations in our asset management plan. To increase our transfers to capital reserve is something we have control of, and we can increase that over time, and we know those funds will be there. We can't start relying on surpluses coming in from year to year. So there's a danger to doing that. So staff still recommend increasing the transfers to reserves on an annual basis.
Councilor McLean?
Thanks, Dan. Second question, and I can't recall if you already explained this, Dan, but our assessment growth this year is, or for 2020, is being set at 2.5%, and in the last couple of years, it's been considerably higher than that. So I'm just wondering why that is, or are we actually growing that much slower than anticipated for this year?
So our assessment growth came in at 2.23% for this year, which is lower than we had anticipated. When we did the pre-budget meetings, we were assuming 2.5%. And we thought we were being conservative with the 2.5%, given what we've seen in the last few years. I wouldn't say that growth has slowed. We may be in a transition period where MPAC is still catching up from an assessment perspective. I know the assessment staff at MPAC are busy with the new valuation period, where they're looking at a new 4-year phased-in valuation starting in 2020. So we've been notified by MPAC staff that a lot of resources and timing have gone to that process, which means they may be further behind with catching up on new assessment on new property. So we're hoping that our growth will be higher next year, but we'll have to see how that plays out.
That's my question.
My last question is a little less directed directly at our budget, but I think this is the appropriate time to ask it, and that is, once again, referring back to the study from that the county had done, that showed that our combined tax with the county is considerably higher than the comparator communities. And I mean, it's really a question, I think, about county more than anything else, but I mean, are they really that much above other upper tier organizations in tax rates? Because there's a big gap there.
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the appendix that is out of the operational efficiency review that the county is doing. And as I mentioned before, these are coming out of FIR data. There's no big deep dive into whether other counties or other municipalities are being effective with their dollars spent. There's no detailed analysis that we're actually comparing apples to apples when it comes to some of the services that they're pulling together with these reports. But for the purpose of Center Wellington, you'll notice, I mean, again, you take the positives and the negatives with a grain of salt when you're doing a jurisdictional review, but we're one of the lowest in the comparatives when it's just a lower tier municipality, and that's all that we're talking about today. You know, if the county council, as we pass that budget, if there's areas where county council doesn't feel like we need to keep the same service level or keep the same projects or programs going, then as a county council, we're going to have to make those decisions. But I can tell you right now, we're definitely not going to make any decisions based on what came out of that one piece of that efficiency review. It just causes us to look at it a little bit and ask the right question. So it's good to ask that question. But really, that's the discussions that we're going to have at a county level. And if there's areas that we think that we can reduce, then we'll do that. But we have to make those decisions at county. But just to repeat, when you look at the data, we're on the second lowest of all the comparators when it comes to our lower tier tax rate. And that's what we're talking about today. Councilor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to follow up on what Councillor McElwain had said. I handed out a sheet, and in this sheet I have some problems because this is actually data that the KPMG gave, and it has Woolwich as lower than us, but in our data we have us as lower. So I'm just wondering how that is. How, like, obviously they did a study, and this came out the 28th, which is new information, and they took the year to do it, and the county paid $650,000 to get all this data, and, but these are actually just numbers, so why did we put ourselves as the lowest when, they have on their sheet that we're the second lowest in their group? So I just don't understand why that is.
Andy?
Right, so just a couple of points. One, the study was not $650,000, it was less, I think it was around $300,000, and that was provincial funding that each of the municipalities did receive a large chunk of money from the province to do the efficiency reviews and the implementation of those. So it is all provincial funding, not local taxpayers. The discrepancy maybe with regards to the timing of the collection when KPMG did it. They were only hired in July and did the study work in July and August, and some of the database from the FIRs. So all this data is from the FIRs, and so some of the questions maybe were regarding to what year KPMG looked at the FIR versus from the completion of Woolwich. Not all the municipalities complete their FIRs on the timely that the province requires, and some don't complete them at all. So it could just be a matter of the database that KPMG was using in the timing versus the timing of the database that we used. So, but they're still relatively close, that we're on the lower part. And, you know, if you look through all of that document, and we'll have this discussion at the 16th, because the report will come forward on the 16th. But when you look at all, when we look at all of the services that we do provide, you will see that we're under, in compared to all our 5 other municipalities, we're under-serviced or providing lower service than our competitors. And that does tie back to the budget, and that's why you see us at the lower end, because we're spending less money on those services that we provide across the municipality at the lower tier, not at the upper tier as the mayor talked about.
Again, I also just want to reiterate, one of the reasons that we had the pre-budget meetings is to provide any direction to staff to look at service levels, look at other things where we could find savings. And so that's why we went through that process. At this point now, I guess the question is, so what do you want to do about it? Like, we've gone through this whole process, and unless there's identified service levels that you want to reduce, there's things that you want to do differently that are net new. We've gone through this entire process. We made sure that we elongated it this year so that some of those big questions can be referred to staff so that they can be prepared to do something with them. Council chose to direct staff to come in at 2.7 or less as a starting point. So I think it's really important to reiterate that we've gone through this process. A lot of contextual data was there in those pre-budget meetings, and it's up to the council to provide direction to staff so that they can build a budget. So, you know, conversation is fine, but we need to provide real direction to staff, and we've just gone through this entire budget process. So we should be at the point now of you know, are we okay with the budget as it stands?
What's the FIR? What's that?
So the financial information report. Each year, the municipalities are to fill in a database that's a provincial database with regards to various different components, from roads plowed to how much we spend on various services. And the challenge with that, it's very difficult to compare apples to apples. And as I mentioned, there is no, they used to tie completing that FIR to receiving funding levels. They do not do that anymore, so a lot of municipalities actually don't even fill in the information.
So one of the challenges, and I just want to do it just to explain one of the difficulties, when consultants use FIR data, and say they're looking at corporate services, for instance, and if they take a line item, how much does it cost one municipality to deliver corporate services versus another municipality? Some of those municipalities have human resources as part of corporate services, some of them don't. So when you take the FIR data, you're not often comparing apples to apples, and that's just usually a starting point. And then you have to ask the other questions. Are you talking about the same functions? So that's a challenge, and that's why I was saying that this should be read with grains of salt. Both the positive side and the negative side is that we don't know that we're comparing apples to apples. It is a good starting point so that that we're looking at different service levels, and it lets us ask some questions. But again, we can't make any kind of resource decisions based on what we're seeing when it comes to comparisons with some of these other municipalities, because we don't have enough information. And frankly, you know, you never should be making decisions based on what one other municipality or a few other municipalities are doing, especially when the data is not completely thorough. Councillor?
I guess what the problem I have is that we have a budget and we have charts that are claiming that we're the lowest. And you have data here that says that we're not the lowest. And so, and it doesn't position us in, and so I'm just wondering about the perception when citizens read the budget and they read this document. I mean, this clearly says that, you know, like combined with the upper tier, we're the highest of these comparators that we have. And Woolwich and Newcomsey are part of our pocket of comparators that we used. And then when it has the per house sport for the lower tier, we're not the lowest, Woolwich is. So are you saying that this report, they don't use the same data as us?
So I think staff have already handled this. They've talked about the two reports were done at different times. And I don't know how much extra there is. Like in one study we're the lowest, the other we're the second lowest. So, so what? Like, I really, like, it's a comparison. It's a jurisdictional review. It's meant to paint a very broad picture. And it's interesting, but staff have answered the question. They were done at two different times, and things change. And they're probably using two different methodologies. There are two reports, two projects that were done for different reasons. And you want to comment on anything there?
Just to reiterate that it is difficult to compare one municipality to another through FIR data. We try to stick to a high-level calculation that tries to keep it as close to a comparable process as possible by looking at the charts we did on page 24 of the budget book, are simply looking at total taxation levy divided by number of households. We know every municipality sets a tax levy, and every municipality has a projection of their number of households. So those are two numbers that we hope we can compare when we're looking at total taxation levy and total number of households. So it's hard to get more granular than that. I know we get it more granular in terms of average residential taxpayer in Centre Wellington, but we don't have that data for other municipalities. So we use FIR data to provide some level of comparison to our neighboring municipalities and to comparable municipalities, but we don't have any other data to compare, so that's what we're restricted to.
Councillor Dunsmore?
I'm wondering if we couldn't put the motion on the floor and then have this budget discussion within the realms of having a motion on the floor. So I would like to move that we accept the draft budget as presented by staff. If we get a seconder, then we can have all these discussions within that context. As amended, because there have been changes made, right?
Yeah, so I'll read the recommendation that as it stands, that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington adopt the 2020 budget as amended. Seconder for that? Councillor McCray. Now we're going to go around the room one at a time and just give your final thoughts on the budget as it sits. Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. From the preliminary meetings, I opposed the 2.7 increase, and I still do. I think that more savings could have been done. It's higher than our previous years, and I think that we should have had much more discussion about the hires in a separate meeting, because the presentation by Marion Love about the increases in costs, we have those increases of costs, and instead of doing a budget process about the new hires, we've had the cake and we're eating it too. So we're increasing on top of, we're increasing the operationals, adding new staff. We didn't have that discussion of each job, and I think the 2.7 is too high and the cumulative of the 4.7 is too high as a result. And I think that these, no matter what you say about the different data is data. It's just, it is what it is, and it bears to question that, well, why did we choose certain municipalities to compare with so that we're the lowest? And this separate organization, the county, picked a different set of, and then we're the highest. Like, it sort of, it makes people wonder, like, how accurate our presentations are for data. And so I think that we're required to present so that we can make the best decisions with what we have. And this is new data, and I disagree with the mayor on that one. I think that perhaps we should incorporate and study. There's a lot of recommendations in that study about different fees that, because we were lucky that it was on Center Wellington, and it gave us a lot of data that we could digest. And I don't think it should be forgotten or misused, so I have that part of it. I think that that's about it. I guess I disagree with that.
Councilor Dunsmore?
I'm, the 2.7% increase is I understand is concerning for everybody. But when I attended AMO in August, there was a lot of talk then about asset management plans, and I was quite impressed at how many people at AMO look towards Center Wellington as an example of good asset management planning. And the fact that we're behind in that, but we're at least have a plan to get caught up, is reassuring to me. Even though it is a 2.7% increase, we are managing our assets. They have been let go for a long time, and we have a huge amount of assets in this community, and we have to fix them and we have to maintain them. And if we don't do that with a 2.7% increase this year, we're going to be forced to do it with a 4 or 5% or even higher in future years. So by spreading the costs out over a longer term and smaller increases, I'm very happy with that. And I know that there's a lot of other municipalities that are envious of the fact that that we took initiative and former councils took initiative to develop this plan, and that we follow through on it. So always would like a lower increase, but also have to keep the ball on the assets that we have under our under our authority, and make sure that we take care of them so we're not burying people in future years. So I'm happy with the budget the way it's been amended.
Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. It's always a challenging process trying to determine what's appropriate for the budget and what should our tax increase be. And I guess what I find is, with the conflicting demands for financial resources, the impact of ongoing maintenance, and also trying to deal with incoming growth. How do we adjust for that? At the end of the day, we have to stay ahead of the wave in terms of not falling behind on our ongoing maintenance and upkeep of existing infrastructure, as well as, putting money to our capital resources fund, and also maintaining services that residents rely on. I mean, the challenge I see is, well, for example, the dedicated capital levy. We brought that in to address the fact that previous councils did not address ongoing maintenance. They decided to kick it down the can to address later on. Well, now, thanks to a forward-thinking council before this one, they said, let's get this dedicated capital levy in and let's start building the bridges. So we're going to have to pay the short-term pain for longer-term gain. So what I see here is this is a reasonable budget, and yeah, I'm happy with it.
Councilor Foster?
Thanks, Kelly. I want to speak against this budget for a number of reasons. First and foremost, we're borrowing $6 million for a garage or a work center, call it what you want. We're borrowing the money when we already have 4 good garages. I realize they need some repairs, but in so doing, we're saddling the town with debt, and I don't like that. The levy, there's been lots of talk about the levy. It was initially sold as a 2% levy. It has now ballooned to 10.4% on the total. In order to have comparable data, we talk about apples and apples. We need to compare the levy to other municipalities who don't have a levy, and we need to compare the levy to the years previous when we didn't have a levy. And on that basis, the levy has increased to 10.4%. Total increase this year is 13.4. If you blend the levy and compare it to years when we had no levy. This year, the total levy is about $1.5 million, and in this budget is a proposal to hire 22 full-time equivalent staff over the 3-year staffing plan. Once you fully implement all that new payroll, that's going to be somewhere in the $1.5 million to $2 million of new payroll. And so what is the point of surtaxing $1.5 million because we didn't do our capital stuff when you're going to increase your expenses by a corresponding amount? You're no closer to your goal of a greater amount of money to put on reserve or put on capital. Effectively, we're spending the levy on staffing. We need to do a better job controlling our operating costs so that we can maximize the dollars available for the vast, vast capital needs we have. And on that basis, we're not doing that, and I oppose this budget.
Councilor Van Loon?
Thank you. First, I'd say that that I very much appreciate the elongated process of this budget. The budget process through the summer base, staff was able to bring different reports over. I guess I would say I probably wasn't one of the advocates of having it pushed in a longer period, but I've actually enjoyed the fact that we've made some decisions that we could fall back on when we got to this budget process. So I think that was helpful for sure. Some of the aspects and conversations we had, most of our decisions that I've seen here are have been policy based. We built a policy, staff brought it forward on a policy. If we're in doubt and we're going to put any types of funds towards anything, we've also agreed to put them into reserves. I say as the most part because I did lose a motion there. I think I can also appreciate the aspect that we're able to work together as council to discuss motions, shoot down motions, pick up motions, and work together to get a budget that actually works, even though individuals may not be happy with exactly every piece. We still look at it and go, we need to move forward. So I would say to council, thank you for working together to make that happen. We spoke in our strategic plans and all that, and how can we should look for the middle ground instead of coming to a non-movement place. So I would say that the budget process worked well that way. I do believe that the difficult decision of that 2% capital levy, it's been a tough 5 years, but we're coming near the end. This is an exciting piece. That capital levy will continue. It never increases anymore. The discussions I've had out within the municipality and with people is always, what's it going to cost me on that house? Oh, okay, we're getting bridges done. We got to get this done. Go for it. I've never yet had anyone, after explaining, go, nah, I don't, forget about those bridges. So I think that's a very encouraging piece. And the 2%, 2.7, with inflation, with our, with all the different pieces of I run different companies. By the time I look at staffing increases, by the time I look at insurance increases, fuel increases, I'm almost positive my own company expenses are going to increase way higher than this. So I'm quite happy with this budget. I think that we've worked hard at it, and thank you to the staff as well, so I could support this budget moving forward.
Councilor Macklin?
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate the work the staff put into this budget, and having the previous meetings has been helpful, although I think From my own perspective, I think discussions we had in previous meetings get accepted as a gimme and go forward, and I think we've skipped over pieces a little bit too quickly now as we go through the actual budget discussions. But that being said, my main issue with this budget remains what I already talked about, which is allocating a 3% equivalent tax increase to a project that we haven't identified and what the requirements are yet. As I said earlier, I would not have approved it at the previous budget meeting had we not been told that the report would be coming to council before our budget discussions, because to me, I just can't justify allocating taxpayers' money to something that we haven't identified yet. And $500,000 is a lot of spending money, that whether it, goes into a reserve waiting for a project to happen, or it goes into the project, its consultants' fees for next year is really what it was identified as, and to do the design of this building that we don't know we need, and I just can't support that. The 2.7, I didn't agree with the previous meeting. I still don't agree with, and I think it's higher than we need. I think we're spending more money than we need to. Staffing is a question, or is a concern for me as well. Budget after budget after budget, I like to see, and have always had to do in private industry, justify expenses. And so I see a new engineer coming in at $160,000 or something, but I don't see an equivalent savings being presented. There may be it may be very well be a perfectly good investment of taxpayers' money, but it's not being presented to us, so I don't know where it's coming back. We've had the same issue with software in the past and some other things other places we spent money, and I just keep asking, show me where we have savings to offset those costs. Efficiency savings in the operations center, what are they? How do you identify them, and what does it add up to? Those kinds of numbers are required to justify spending the money. It's not our money, it's taxpayers' money. Spending taxpayers' money, we have to have justification for all of those expenses, and I don't see them right now.
Thanks, members of council. A couple comments that I have, and I want to take a minute to thank Dan and Mark under Andy's direction and the whole senior management team for pulling this budget together. A lot of work goes into it, and appreciate how difficult it was to go from the initial budget allocation based on the needs that are in all the different departments, and to bring that down to something that council directed you to bring it down to. And I'd love to be a fly on a wall in some of those discussions, because I know it's not easy, and we didn't start with a wish list, but you started with something that was practical, and then you had to move on that as well. Appreciate you going through that process and providing council with all the justification and all the rationale and all the information that council needs to have to make the decision today on this budget. I think sometimes as members of council, we do take our staff for granted. We have really, really good staff here, and all you have to do is, listen to the nature of the discussion that goes on, and the answers and the information that can be provided to councillors on the fly when there's no pre-warning of what the questions are. It's extraordinary, and we have really good staff, and we appreciate all the work that you do on this budget. It's a lot of work, and I know that. I think it is difficult, when we're dealing with infrastructure, and we are making up for some lost time when it comes to infrastructure. But I think as council can take a lot of pride in what we've been able to accomplish. Bridges are getting rebuilt at a rate we've never seen before. That takes a significant amount of work on a very small team. And so I have no challenges with the staff that we've added in that area. I think it's absolutely needed. I actually can imagine that they could have done what they've already done to this point with the level of staffing that we already have. And so I was not at all surprised to see in this budget the request for that project management skill set and capacity. I think that was absolutely required. And we can't wear our team out, and we are at the verge of doing that. So I'm very in favor of the staffing moves that we've made, and I appreciate the leadership for the senior team to go through that and provide us with their priorities on what the staff requirements are. I know a lot of work goes into identifying what those resources are. And by the time the council sees it, it's been a very, the rationale from an administrative side has been already figured out. So we've stuck to approximately the same percentage of our budget that goes to staff time, and I think that's what you can anticipate, and that's what you can ask for as a council. We're a growing community. Staff resources. It's no surprise that staff resources have to increase as our community gets larger, and we're doing more projects and doing more work. So that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody here. You know, in addition to that, we're spending some good time and effort and resources in our downtowns. Our downtowns have never looked as good as they do right now. We're allocating resources to make sure that this is a place that we can be proud of in 10, 20 years. And we're thinking about things and with long-term lens, and I think that's really important, and councils have to do that. And it takes money to do some of these things, but we have to do them right. And so I appreciate staff coming to the table, providing their expertise and their direction as we take a long-term perspective on some of the work that we do and some of the things that we see going on in our community. I'm really excited, and this council here can take a lot of pride in moving forward and being forward-thinking with our OLG policy to identify money that is earmarked for economic development and arts, culture, and heritage. That's very innovative and very unique, and all of us had a hand in moving forward with that policy. And I think that's really, really good. And downstream, we're going to see a lot of good benefit from that. If we get that policy right, we're going to see a lot of good benefits, because there are so many groups out there who do so much good work to make this community what it is today. And having a sustainable funding that goes directly to that, that's probably one of the best decisions we've been able to make in this term of council, for sure, because I think that's really important. At the end of the day, we're getting things done. We're making sure that we put the staff, we talk a lot about value for tax dollars. We worked a lot to make sure that we're providing, being efficient with our funding, and I'm excited to see in the future what might come out of the study that we did with the county to even be more efficient. That's not going to help us this budget, but that hopefully will help us in budgets to come, as we do as much as we can with the tax dollars that we have. So I'm very excited about this budget, and I think it's going to allow us to do all the things that our citizens and our community groups have said are their priorities through our strategic plan. So I'm very happy with this budget, and I would really encourage members of council to support it. I would like a recorded vote. A budget is a really, really important decision that councillors make, and I think it should be on record as to how we voted for our budget to provide the right kind of accountability back to citizens. So with that, I will call the question. We have a mover and a seconder. All in favor of the 2020 budget? Opposed? And that's carried, and I'll turn it over to Carrie to do the recorded vote.
Councillor Kittredge? Nay.
No.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yes.
Councillor McCrae?
Yes.
Councillor McElwain?
No.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Yes.
Councillor Foster?
No.
And Mayor Linton? Yes. It is carried.
Okay, so that finishes up business for today, and I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Kittredge, second for Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And we're adjourned. Thanks for your work today.